Purity laws. Why is a pig unclean? Okay. Why is a catfish unclean? When I was growing up, did we eat catfish? Did any of you eat ham? Okay. Bacon. Okay. So catfish. Why is a catfish unclean? Okay. Why is a woman, now this is a little trickier, why is a woman unclean after childbirth? A woman after childbirth, isn't childbirth a natural process? Childbirth approved of God? Approved of God, natural process. Why is a woman after childbirth, why is she considered unclean? Here's another one. A married couple after having relations is considered unclean. A married couple, by the way, did God ordain that right from the beginning? Yeah, God, a man and wife, and they become one flesh. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Okay, so here, married couple after having relations is unclean. So how do you think about this thing with this uncleanness type of thing, and how are we to understand it? Do you see the differences in these things? So I want to kind of explore different rationale for that and these purity laws. By the way, is this really foreign to our culture? Okay, and so what we're doing is moving to another culture, and we're moving back 3,000 years. And so in some sense, you got to kind of get out of the American, the way we think about things. They think about things very differently back then. And here's another one. Why was a priest with a deformed hand not allowed to serve? If a priest had a deformed hand, I've got a good friend, Floyd Vautah, and he's a librarian friend of mine, and he's got a deformed hand like this. Would he be allowed to serve as a priest? He couldn't serve as a priest. You say, well, that's discrimination against the handicapped, That's not you totally missed the point of the book of Leviticus, okay? So anyways, priests with deformed hands. So how do you make sense out of all these things? And so that's chapter 21, verse 5 and 17 and other places. So let me try to tackle that now. So let's. Some people say that these purity laws are totally arbitrary, that God just said it, do this because I said so. By the way, have your parents ever told you to do something just because I said so? Okay. Is God totally arbitrary though? Yeah, so that doesn't usually work real well. So this God being totally arbitrary doesn't really fit his character. He usually does stuff for a purpose and things. So this one I find the weakest of the arguments. To be honest, I'd throw that out. Just doesn't match God's character. He doesn't ask people to do things just totally arbitrarily. It seems always is connected with his character or his destiny or something, goals like character. Here's an explanation, cultic or cultural, that God is saying, hey, you guys, I want you guys to be different than the Canaanites. I want you to be different than the Canaanites. The Canaanites, when they build an altar, what do they build their altars out of? Cut stone. The Canaanites, when they do it, they cut and they cut their stone so that it's the stones fit together, and they build their altars out of cut stone. God says, I don't want you to build your altar like that. I want you to build an altar out of uncut stones. Now, by the way, when we go back 3,000 years, can we tell a Jewish altar versus a Canaanite altar? Can we tell immediately? Yeah, a Canaanite altar is made out of cut stone down at a place called Arad, for example. You see a Canaanite altar, cut stone. And the Jewish altars are made out of uncut stone. At least some of them. Anyways, the Jews actually did make some out of cut stone and stuff. They weren't supposed to, but they did. So anyways, in other words, the Canaanite culture does it this way, God says. I don't want you to do it that way. I want you to do it different so that there's a difference between your culture and Canaanite culture. And some of the laws seem to be explained by this difference in culture. So this does explain some stuff. The difference in culture between the Canaanite culture and the Israeli culture does seem to explain some things. Now here's another one, the hygienics. There was a guy in the 1950s named Macmillan who wrote a book called None of These Diseases. And what he did was he was a medical doctor. And as a medical doctor, he went through the book of Leviticus and he just said, is this stuff healthy? Now, by the way, did the Jews know anything about germs? The Jews had no clue about germs, okay? Absolutely no clue. Even the people in early America. Do you remember, has anybody been to Williamsburg and stuff, and how many people died because basically just basic health stuff they didn't know about germs and stuff, and these people died, okay, and things. Hygienic thing. He goes through, by the way, the Jews, are they always washing their hands? Are they always washing their hands? Is that very healthy? That's very healthy, okay? You don't eat pig. You don't eat pork. Back in those days, did pork have trichinosis and things? And therefore, now by the way, when you guys go to eat pork, does pork have trichinosis in America anymore? It's all been bred out. So you guys, to be honest with you, don't have to worry about it. But back when I was growing up earlier, did you not leave pork sit out very long? Okay? Would you eat pork without cooking it? Now, today, it's probably, the trichinosis is not a problem and stuff. And actually, has anybody ever seen somebody, this guy that married my daughter and stuff, eats hamburger? Has anybody ever seen somebody eat hamburger, like, without cooking it? They eat raw hamburger? No, I'm not kidding you. The guy eats raw hamburger and stuff. I don't know. I thought that was really weird and stuff. Cook your hamburger, please, and cook your stuff. But anyways, trichinosis with pork, okay, so he noticed that. By the way, a woman is unclean after childbirth. Should a woman get a break after childbirth? And this is the way they did it. For 33 days, a woman was unclean after childbirth. And by the way, is that a healthy thing for her? Yes, it is. Okay, so many of the rules, let me just do this one. Okay, think about this in terms of bacteria and things. When you had to do your number, were you allowed to do your number? Were you allowed to go to the restroom inside the Jewish camp? No. The Bible says when you're inside the camp of Israel, you have the problem, you got to go. Basically, you have to go outside the camp, and you have to bring a paddle with you to do what? You have to bury it outside the camp. Burying it outside the camp, is that healthy? Because if you did it inside the camp, would there be all sorts of flies and disease and all that kind of stuff? And God says, hey, no, when you do your number, do it outside the camp. Bury it outside the camp. Is that healthy? I mean, we still do it today. We call them septic tanks and things like that to this day. So what Macmillan does is go through and says a lot of these rules are just downright healthy rules. A lot of them are downright healthy. But does that explain all of them? No, it doesn't. I'm going to propose another one now. This is actually built off a sociologist named Mary Douglas. And I've kind of adopted it as my own and made it my own stuff. But this next one that I'm going to show you explains some of the really hard ones, the ones that I can't figure out and I have no clue on. And this is what I want to call I call this the yuckiness view, okay? The yuckiness view. Does each culture have that which within the culture is yucky? Go back to a ritual with my wife. I like hamburgers. I like them with ketchup. I love ketchup. And so I put ketchup on both sides of the burger. I crunch into it, and then I get this ketchup thing going down here. And then I go to my wife and I say, do you love me? I want to kiss my gorgeous bride. And I've got ketchup coming down. And I know I've got ketchup coming down. And I want to see, do you love me? How much do you love me? Will you kiss me? And stuff? Of course you won't. Get back from me. Anyway, get away from me. Go wipe your mouth. That kind of stuff. Okay? Question. When I approach her and I've got ketchup hanging down my mouth, question, is that yucky? Okay, let me use a different example. Okay, that's a bad example. Let me use a different example. Okay, I'm at a place called Grace College. There's a girl from another part of the world. In that part of the world, this is no joke, they eat spiders. So she's in the dorm, and there's a spider, and she pops it. Question. Yeah, okay, that. Does everybody see that? Is this that, is that question? That's yuckiness, okay? Now, by the way, did she see it as yucky? No. By the way, insects, is there good protein in insects? The honest truth is. Yeah. She popped it and stuff. Everybody has got a gross stomach, all that stuff. I think she was doing it partially for effect, but it just, she popped it. So I'm saying is yuckiness, different things in different cultures. And so let me just do this, okay? Let me do Dave Slusher, is a friend of mine. Dave had a brain tumor, and the brain tumor was, I was right behind his eye. He went to Cleveland Clinic, and they went into his head and pulled the tumor out. It was about the size of a golf ball. While they were in his head, they cut there's like a nerve that does your eyelid goes up and down on this nerve thing. They cut the nerve on one of his eyelids. So what happens is his eyelid came down, and it was like permanently down. So he could see through one eye, but his eyelid was down on the other side. Now what happens to your eye when your eyelid goes down after a period of time? Well, your eye atrophies. And so basically he went blind in one eye, okay? So now he goes up. He goes up to people. When people come up to Dave, he's a very gregarious person. He's a wonderful conversationalist person, delightful guy, big guy. He comes up to people. Well, he watched people's eyes to see when they do what? Yeah, question. He comes up to them, he'll talk with them, and he's watching their eyes the whole time. And will they look around and just be talking to him and stuff, and all of a sudden will he see their eyes, boom, stare at that down eye. Yeah. Now, by the way, if he's talking with kids, will kids be really dramatic? And has your parents ever told you, you don't stare and stuff like that? Okay. Now, question. So you come up to Dave, and he's got this bad eye, and all of a sudden you're going like, and I'll say, holy cow, look at that. All right. Now you're coming in to worship God. Does God want you staring at his eye, or does God want you thinking about him in worship? You come up on a priest that's got a deformed hand. You bring your sheep or goat up to offer sacrifice. You got this priest who comes up with a deformed hand. What are you going to be watching? This one-armed priest taking down your sheep. I'm sorry, but are you going to see, how does this guy do this thing, man? He's got one arm taking the sheep down. Is everybody going to be thinking about how this guy's going to pull this off? I'm sorry, I'm not that weird. You guys think the same thing. You're just too polite. I know you guys are just all too classy for this stuff. But anyways, what I'm saying is, do you see how we take the focus off worship? That everybody be thinking, how's this guy going to wrestle the sheep up there? And so therefore God's saying, let me put it another way. Let me use a different word from you. I don't want that which is non-normal. In other words, I want things to be normal so that when you come, there's nothing yucky. That when you come to my presence, everything is normal and you can focus on me. And that you're not distracted with this other stuff. So, for example, when you do your number, you don't do it in the camp. And all of a sudden, somebody's walking in the camp going to worship, and all of a sudden, and they start going, and they go to worship, and they get the stuff on their foot and stuff, and it smells, and they go, let's get out of here, kind of thing. God says, get out of the camp. When you come into my presence, I want you to be able to focus on me. So that's what's normal. Now, by the way, what is normal? Will that be different in different cultures? Will what's normal be different in different cultures? And so, that which is whole, God knows their culture, and he says, that which is whole, when you come before me, I want everything to be normal. I don't want anything to be like, create dissonance when you're coming to worship me. So this yuckiness view, I think each culture does have these yucky things, and God's saying, don't do that when you're coming to worship and things. So, I like this one because it explains some of the hard ones and just says some of the stuff, we just don't have the culture, we don't know the culture and stuff, but it seems that this is a cultural differentiation. Yeah, Eric.
So basically it's like, have these laws so that you're not really distracted.
Yeah, so that the focus can be on God in an act of worship rather than on the particulars that are around. Now,